The morning of March 15th, 2,000 years ago, was unusually cool for springtime Boston, as botany professor Robert Haley checked the contents of his tattered Eastpak backpack one last time before his long-awaited expedition into the Amazon jungle. "We're going to find this orchid, and the cure for Alzheimer's disease will become a reality," Robert said as he lifted a cup of coffee on toast, unaware that those words would be replayed hundreds of times in news reports of their disappearance. The team gathered around the dining room table in Robert's apartment. 32-year-old Michelle Clark, a tropical plant specialist with the grace of a dancer and the personality of a fighter. 27-year-old Jason Rodriguez, a biochemist who had recently earned his doctorate from MIT. And 25-year-old photographer David Miller, whose wildlife images had graced the covers of National Geographic. Tattered maps, satellite images, and recordings from previous expeditions were spread across the kitchen. And between them lay 4 identical Motorola StarTAC phones, specially purchased for communication in extreme conditions. The university gave us a grant of $250,000, but the real value of what we're looking for is measured in the billions, Michelle noted, as she made final notes in her leather moleskin notebook. Late that night, as the last suitcases were packed, Robert called his ex-wife Carol. "Don't worry, I'll be back in a month with a discovery that will change our lives." His voice, recorded by the answering machine, would be the last known message from the expedition leader. 12 years later, on June 7, 2012, Robert's backpack with dried bloodstains would be discovered in a hidden cave deep in the Amazon jungle, 7 kilometers from the group's last point of contact. Long before that memorable March morning, Professor Haley had already been obsessed with finding the rare Dracula vampira orchid with unique biochemical properties. According to entries in his Dell Lab journal, dated January 9th of the 2000th year, and subsequently admitted into case file number AS-2045-12, an extract from this plant had shown unprecedented efficacy against neurodegenerative diseases. Robert had not slept for 3 nights in a row when he received the first results of the tests on mice. The animals with artificially induced Alzheimer's symptoms showed 90% recovery of cognitive function. Dr. Susan Page, head of Harvard University's neuropharmacology laboratory, recalled in an April 22nd interview with CNN. "He said to me, 'Sue, we're on the cusp of a revolution in medicine. We just need live samples of the plant.'" At 6 hours and 30 minutes on the morning of March 16th, all 4 researchers loaded their equipment into a silver Ford Explorer. Jason Rodriguez methodically packed the fragile instruments, among them a $42,000 Agilent portable spectrometer. David Miller was checking his Canon EOS cameras and low-pro waterproof cases, and in his pocket was a worn lucky penny found on the streets of New York City. I remember Michelle coming out on the porch with a heavy locket around her neck. It was a family heirloom she always took on expeditions. Thomas Grant, a neighbor of Haley's, told police in a March 30th police statement. She said something strange, something like, "If we're not back in 6 weeks, then we've found more than just a plant." The final preparations were filmed on a Sony Handycam video camera by Robert himself. That tape, later seized from his apartment by FBI investigators, captured the moment Haley handed each participant a sealed envelope. "Insurance," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Open it only if something happens to me." The envelopes remained unopened in the explorers' backpacks. In Michelle's notebook, found among her personal belongings in her Cambridge apartment, the last entry is dated March 14th, the day before she left. "Received a strange call, unknown number. A man asked if we were really going to the Javari River area and then advised a change of route. Said the area was occupied. Occupied by who? I told Robert, but he just shrugged. At Logan Airport at 8 hours and 45 minutes, the group checked in for American Airlines flight AA-742 to Miami, from where they were to transfer to a flight to Manaus, Brazil. Security cameras captured the moment the tall man in a dark Brooks Brothers suit approached Robert and handed him a folded piece of paper. Haley read the note, frowned, then slipped it into the pocket of his Levi's jeans. The contents of the note remained unknown. They looked like normal scientists going into the field, recalled Janet Reeves, a front desk employee. The only thing memorable was a Garmin GPS beacon that Mr. Haley asked to be separately checked as valuable luggage. He said it was their insurance in case they got lost in the jungle. It's ironic. The final airport surveillance footage shows the group going through the gate. Robert turns around and looks directly into the camera, as if sensing that they are being watched. This black and white still image would become the most recognizable image in the story of their disappearance. According to flight attendant Karen Mason's account, Robert Haley worked on a map of the route during the flight, marking with a red Sharpie marker the area near Brazil's border with Peru, known as the Orchid Valley. They were met in Manaus by guide Carlos Fernandez, who would later become a key witness in the investigation. In light of what we know now, there were a lot of warning signs pointing to danger. FBI agent Michael Donovan would note 12 years later, looking at photos of the smiling explorers before they left. Anonymous calls, a strange note at the airport, inexplicable attention from unknown persons. But at that moment, who could have guessed that 4 scientists from Boston would face something far more deadly than the Amazon wilderness? According to the radio log, the last contact with Haley's expedition was on March 26th of the 2000th year at 16 hours and 20 minutes local time, when the group reported their intention to go deeper into unexplored territory near the Javari River. The weather is deteriorating, but we've found evidence of a plant similar to our target, Michelle Clark radioed, her voice punctuated by static. We'll contact you at the same time tomorrow. 3 days later, when communication was not restored, local guide Carlos Fernandez and his search party discovered the expedition's abandoned camp. The North Face tents stood untouched, with personal belongings, research equipment, and food supplies inside, but no team members on site. It looked as if they had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind cups of unfinished coffee. Fernandez testified in an official Amazonas State Police report. For the next 2 weeks, more than 150 rescuers combed the jungle in a radius of 30 kilometers, using Sikorsky helicopters, drones, and specially trained dogs, but found no trace of the missing Americans. On April 15th, David Miller's backpack was found 30 meters from the camp, containing Kodak tapes of photographs and his diary with the last entry, "Something is watching us from the dark. Robert says it is just a jaguar, but the sounds are unlike any animal I know." On April 28th, Brazilian authorities officially announced that the American explorers had probably been victims of an accident, perhaps drowned while attempting to cross the river in a flash flood. But the families of the missing have strongly rejected this theory, pointing to the strange circumstances of the disappearance and the absence of bodies. A recording of Michelle Clark's voice, stored on a Panasonic tape in the Manaus base of operations, has been the subject of numerous forensic examinations. FBI audio analysis specialist Randall Morris noted in his May 20, 2000 report, "The background of Clark's voice contains anomalous, low-frequency sounds, not typical of atmospheric noise or technical equipment malfunctions." The source of the sounds has not been identified. NOAA satellite meteorological data confirmed worsening weather in the region on March 26th and 27th. Tropical downpours of up to 70 millimeters of rain per hour. However, radio communications worked properly even in the worst weather conditions, which cast doubt on the version of technical failure as the cause of the contact breakdown. We sent a distress signal at 14 hours and 30 minutes on March 29th, when the allotted 48 hours without communication had passed. Eduardo Mendez, the Manaus base manager, told ABC News. By 17 o'clock the same day, the first Bell search helicopter was already in the air, but due to a thunderstorm front was only able to reach the coordinates of the camp the next morning. Photos of the abandoned camp, taken by Fernandez with a Nikon camera, convey an eerie picture of the sudden disappearance. On Coleman's camping table is an unfinished breakfast, canned Starkist, packets of Folgers instant coffee, Robert's open notebook with notes on the plant's whereabouts. 4 REI sleeping bags are neatly spread out in the tents, the researchers' personal belongings laid out with the pedantic neatness of scientists accustomed to systematization. The most disturbing thing was not what we found, but what was missing, Fernandez explained to investigators. Their Motorola cell phones were lying on the charger. The Garmin GPS beacon remained in its protective case. Even the water flasks stood untouched. No one goes into the jungle voluntarily without these things. Judge Augusto Rivero, who led the initial investigation, commissioned forensic experts from the Brazilian Federal Police to conduct a thorough analysis of the camp. Report #FPB-0432-00, dated April 3rd, noted, "No signs of struggle, blood, or signs of forced entry. However, microparticles of an unknown substance were found in the soil around the tents, the chemical composition of which is not consistent with the local flora." Michelle Clark's cousin, Olivia Sutton, received a letter from Michelle sent the day before she disappeared. "Last night, Robert took samples of a plant that may be our target. Jason did an initial analysis at our field station. The results are stunning. If the chemical properties are confirmed, it will change not only medicine, but our understanding of biochemistry in general. David jokes that there's a Nobel Prize waiting for all of us." On April 5th, 7 kilometers from the camp, a search team, led by Sergeant Enrique Lopez, found evidence of a recent campfire. Several empty thermoscientific sample containers and a Silva compass believed to be Robert's. Forensics showed that the fire had been started in a hurry, and traces in the soil indicated the presence of at least 6 people. More than the expedition's lineup. Someone else was there with them, or after them, Lopez said at a briefing in Manaus on April 7th. Asked by reporters about the possibility of an attack by local tribes, the sergeant said, "The nearest Yanomami Indian settlement is more than 100 kilometers away. Also, there are no aggressive tribes in the area. They rather avoid contact with the outside world." A recording from a meteorological station 50 kilometers from the site of the disappearance recorded unusual electromagnetic activity on the night of March 26th to 27th. The station technician, Marco Duarte, noted in the log, "At 23 hours and 45 minutes, all instruments showed a failure for 9 seconds, then returned to normal operation. It appears to be an electromagnetic pulse of unknown origin." The discovery of David Miller's backpack was a key piece of evidence. An examination of the tapes at the FBI lab revealed a series of photographs taken an hour before the alleged disappearance. One photo, dated 16 hours and 45 minutes, showed a blurred silhouette among the trees, a figure too tall for a man, with unusual proportions. Experts have been unable to determine whether it is an optical illusion, a film defect, or a real object. The last entry in Miller's diary, made with a Parker ballpoint pen, ended with the ragged phrase, "Robert insists we take more samples, despite..." Pressure analysis of the paper showed that the entry was made in a hurry, with growing anxiety. Carol Haley, Robert's ex-wife, did not accept the authorities' version of the accident. In 20 years of field research, Robert never made a fatal mistake. He knew how to survive in the most extreme conditions, from the Himalayas to the Sahara. And suddenly, 4 experienced researchers make a decision at the same time that leads to tragedy. It's absurd. Jason Rodriguez's parents, Maria and Jorge, hired private investigator Frank Donahue, a former FBI agent. After reviewing the case file, Donahue presented an alternative theory. "I believe the group discovered something of value, perhaps the very plant they were looking for. This attracted the attention of third parties with illicit intentions. It could be about biopiracy, kidnapping to obtain scientific data, or eliminating competitors in the race for a patent." Michelle Clark's mother, Elizabeth, addressed an open letter to the Washington Post. "My daughter mentioned in the last call home that they are not the only ones interested in this plant. She talked about strange coincidences and chance encounters with other researchers in the region. Why aren't the authorities checking this theory?" By mid-May, the search operation was officially scrapped. A press release from the Brazilian police said there were no viable leads to continue the search. However, a memo released years later through a Freedom of Information Act request included the phrase, "Reasons for ending the search include pressure from unidentified U.S. government agencies and lack of diplomatic support to continue the investigation." On April 28, the day the search was officially called off, an unusual glow in the night sky was observed by several local residents over the jungle area where the expedition disappeared. A photograph of the phenomenon, taken with a cheap Kodak camera by local farmer Paulo Silva, would not be published in National Geographic until 7 years after the tragedy, becoming another unsolved piece in this dark puzzle. On June 7, 2012, local hunter Paulo Mendez and his son, while stalking an injured jaguar, accidentally discovered the entrance to an unknown cave 7 kilometers north of where Haley's expedition was last seen. "First I saw a glint of metal in the dirt. It was a Rolex watch that kept ticking as if its owner had taken it off only yesterday," Mendez later told CNN reporters, showing a photo of the find on the screen of his worn Nokia. Inside the cave, hidden behind a dense veil of vines and visible only from a certain angle of sunlight, rescuers found human remains that forensic experts identified as belonging to Jason Rodriguez, based on dentures and preserved DNA fragments. The skull showed multiple fractures characteristic of blunt force trauma, and the preserved hand bones showed evidence of binding with strong synthetic cord manufactured by DuPont, read the report by Dr. Alan Bernstein of the FBI. Remains of Thermo Fisher Scientific laboratory equipment belonging to the expedition, several containers of plant samples, and an empty shell gasoline canister with the serial number partially obliterated were found in the same cave. FBI agent Michael Donovan, who led the new investigation, told a news conference in Washington, D.C., "We are not dealing with an accident, but with the deliberate killing of American citizens, possibly related to their scientific endeavors or to something they accidentally discovered." Analysis of soil from the cave by Quantico Laboratories revealed an unusually high concentration of a rare alkaloid found in the orchids Haley's team was looking for, giving the investigation its first major lead. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when Mendez and his 14-year-old son Ricardo stepped to the edge of a small clearing where an overgrown rock barely stood out against the lush green of the jungle. "I've been hunting in these forests for 32 years, but I've never seen this place," Mendez said in an official statement recorded at the Manaus police station on June 8th. It was as if the jungle decided to reveal its secret on this particular day. The watch discovered by Mendez was a Rolex Submariner model purchased by Jason Rodriguez 3 weeks before the expedition, according to a receipt from a store in Boston. The watch's winding mechanism, according to Swiss Watch Association expert Michel Lehmann, showed abnormal preservation, as if the watch had been in an airtight container rather than in the humid jungle for 12 years. Brazilian Federal Police Captain João Silva was the first to enter the cave at 9 hours and 15 minutes on the morning of June 8th after receiving a message from Mendez. The atmosphere inside was unnatural, he later recalled in the National Geographic documentary, The Mystery of the Haley Expedition. The temperature inside was 7 degrees lower than outside. The air seemed dry, despite the tropical humidity all around. And the smell, chemical, pungent, with notes of something organic. Rodriguez's remains lay in the far corner of the cave, partially covered by rocks, as if someone had tried to create the semblance of a grave. Photos from the discovery site, taken by forensic scientist Maria Gonzalez with a Canon EOS 7D camera, showed the skeletonized remains in a pose indicative of limbs bound before death. The post-mortem interval is approximately 11 to 12 years, indicated the preliminary forensic report by Dr. Carlos Mendoza of the University of São Paulo. The nature of the injuries indicates deliberate violence with an object like a geology hammer or similar instrument. Death was caused by extensive head trauma. A diary found in a Pelican waterproof container next to the remains contained entries made by Jason's hand between the 21st and 26th of March, 2012. The last entry read, "Robert insists on continuing his research despite strange events." Michelle reported this morning that she saw signs of another camp 3 kilometers to the east. "We're not the only ones looking for the orchid." David noticed movement in the bushes, someone watching us. The samples show an unknown alkaloid with a molecular structure not registered in the databases. It could be a breakthrough, or the strange sounds are getting louder. MIT biochemistry professor Lawrence Cohen, Rodriguez's former supervisor, after studying the samples found in the cave, noted in an interview with Scientific American, "This is not just a new species of orchid. Its chemical composition contains compounds that could theoretically affect brain neuroplasticity to a degree sufficient to reverse neurodegenerative processes. The theoretical patent value for such a compound is measured in billions of dollars." In the central part of the cave, forensic scientists found bloodstains on the floor and walls. DNA testing at the FBI lab identified the blood as belonging to 2 different people, Jason Rodriguez and a second unidentified person whose genetic material did not match the rest of the expedition. "The distribution of the blood spatter indicates a violent struggle," explained forensic scientist Robert Anderson, a specialist in crime scene analysis. "The height of the location of some of the stains, up to 2 meters from the floor, indicates that the blows were delivered with great force, possibly by multiple attackers." Among the items found in the cave, investigators were particularly interested in a Leica microscope with a serial number matching equipment issued to the expedition by Harvard University. The lens of the microscope had fingerprints belonging not to Jason, but to another member of the expedition, Robert Haley, which confirmed the presence of the group leader in the cave. A phone call announcing the find came to Jason's mother, Helena Rodriguez, at 16 hours and 8 minutes on June 7th. For 12 years, I woke up every morning thinking that today might be the day I would find out what happened to my son, she shared with a New York Times reporter. Now I know he's dead, but this is not the end, just the beginning of the journey toward truth and justice. On June 10th, FBI Director Thomas Baker signed an order creating a special investigative team, codenamed Operation Orchid. The team consisted of 22 agents, including specialists in international crimes, biotechnology, and homicide investigations. This case is of national importance and involves the security of American citizens abroad, Baker said at a closed-door congressional briefing. Key to the investigation was an alkaloid found in the cave's soil, provisionally named Compound R7. According to Dr. Elizabeth Chen of the FBI's Pharmacology Laboratory, this compound has the unique ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier and interact with hippocampal neurons, making it potentially revolutionary in the treatment of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. Quantico's spectral analysis of the samples revealed another disturbing fact. Some of the containers retained traces of chemical reagents used to synthesize psychotropic substances. Perhaps someone was trying to use the expedition's discovery not for medical, but for narcotic purposes, toxicologist James Faraday suggested in his report. On the inside wall of the cave, hidden from the entrance, forensic scientists found the words scratched into the stone. BN knows. Look for Victor O. That inscription, according to handwriting analysis, was in the hand of Jason Rodriguez. The initials BN would be the starting point for the next phase of the investigation, leading agents to the BioNatura Corporation. On June 14, 2012, exactly 1 week after the discovery of the remains, Agent Michael Donovan, accompanied by 3 specialists, returned to the cave for a second look. To their surprise, the entrance to the cave was partially blocked by a recent landslide, and there were signs of unauthorized persons inside. Someone had gotten in here after our first visit and was trying to destroy the remaining evidence, Donovan stated in an urgent report to the FBI director. On September 2, 2012, a man identifying himself as Eduardo Sanchez, a former security officer for the pharmaceutical company BioNatura, contacted the U.S. consulate in Lima anonymously. They weren't killed because of orchids. They had accidentally discovered a clandestine laboratory for the production of a new kind of synthetic drug based on the very orchid they were looking for, Sanchez claimed in his testimony, recorded on a 6-hour Sony Handycam video. Federal agents verifying the witnesses' information determined that BioNatura was a subsidiary of Pharmasynth Corporation, which funded several expeditions to the Amazon in the late 90s and owned patents on tropical plant-based drugs. There is evidence that BioNatura's head of security, Victor Ortiz, and 4 of his subordinates were in the Javari River region during the same period as the missing expedition, Agent Donovan said in a closed briefing, excerpts of which were leaked to the Washington Post on September 12th. A thorough review of Pharmasynth's financial records revealed a series of suspicious transactions totaling $800,000 through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands in April of the 2000th year, under the signature of Chief Financial Officer Howard Schultz. On October 15th, agents from the FBI and Brazilian Federal Police searched Victor Ortiz's home in a suburb of Sao Paulo, where at 9:57 a.m., they found a Chubb safe containing personal items of the missing scientists, including the wedding ring of Tiffany & Co., Robert Haley, and a Sony flash card with encrypted files that, when decrypted, turned out to be photos of a secret jungle lab. Daniel Harris, the deputy U.S. consul in Peru, recalled that day as a normal Tuesday filled with routine work, until a thin man with a nervous look and a North Face backpack walked into the reception area. He was startled, looked around every few seconds, and insisted on meeting without an appointment, claiming it was a matter of life and death for American citizens, Harris noted in an official report to the State Department. Sanchez pulled a leather notebook with the Bio Natura emblem and a stack of photos taken with a Nikon camera from his backpack before beginning to speak. I was working lab security when they were brought in, tied up, with bags over their heads. Sanchez's voice shook on a videotape taken in the consulate's special interrogation room. Ortiz told us they were rival spies. It was only later that I realized they were American scientists being talked about on the news. The taped testimony lasted from 14 hours and 30 minutes to 20 hours and 15 minutes, with 2 short breaks. Sanchez described an underground laboratory hidden 17 kilometers from Bio Natura's official research base, where experiments were conducted with tropical plant alkaloids to create a new type of psychoactive substance. They called it Project Nectar, a drug that was supposed to revolutionize the antidepressant market, but in reality was creating a powerful psychedelic substance with addictive effects, Sanchez claimed, showing a man in a white Dickies lab coat next to Agilent Technologies equipment in the photos. This is Professor Ramon Gutierrez, a former researcher at the University of Sao Paulo who was fired for unethical experiments. He led the development. FBI facial identification specialist Sarah Johnson, analyzing the recording, said, "Physiological indications are true 76% of the time. The subject believes what he is saying, although individual details may be distorted due to post-traumatic stress disorder." According to Sanchez, Haley's expedition accidentally stumbled upon traces of Bio Natura's activities, finding the same rare orchids but already collected by someone else. On March 24th of the year 2000, Ortiz received a message from our observer that a group of Americans were moving in the direction of the secret laboratory. That same evening, he gathered 5 guards, including myself, and we moved out in search of the scientists. The distance between the Haley expedition's temporary base and the secret Bio Natura laboratory was less than 20 kilometers, an insurmountable obstacle for rescue helicopters during heavy rains, but a passable route for a prepared group in Toyota Land Cruiser Jeeps. We found their camp empty, but it was clear from radio chatter that they had located one of our assembly points, Sanchez recounted, nervously rubbing the scar on his left arm. Ortiz ordered us to spread out and find the Americans before dark. We used FLIR thermal imaging cameras that the company had equipped the guards with to circumvent local law. Sanchez's former colleague, Raul Mendoza, later corroborated his testimony by contacting the U.S. Embassy in Brazil on September 16th. "Eduardo is telling the truth. I was there when Ortiz interrogated the American professor. He demanded information on exactly what they had managed to find out about nectar and to whom they had reported it." While checking witness statements, FBI agents discovered a strange entry in Pharmacent's corporate reports for the first quarter of the 2000th year for a write-off of research equipment lost in transit in the amount of $126,000, exactly the same value as the instruments issued to the expedition by Harvard University. "This is not a coincidence," FBI financial analyst James Collins said at the briefing. "The equipment changed hands from the expedition to Pharmacynth and then was written off to conceal its origin." On September 27th, Agent Donovan received an anonymous envelope with no return address sent from Manaus. Inside was an old Kingston USB drive with a video file dated March 28th of the year 2000. The footage, captured on a low-quality surveillance camera, showed 4 bound men being led down a corridor with concrete walls. Despite the poor quality, experts confirmed with an 87% probability that these were members of the missing expedition. That was the turning point of the investigation, Donovan explained in an interview with NPR. We got confirmation that the scientists had been kidnapped and taken to some facility, presumably the underground Bio-Natura lab. On October 8th, a Massachusetts court issued a search warrant for Pharmasynth's offices in Cambridge. During the highly secretive operation, agents seized Dell hard drives and documentation related to Project Nectar. Among the seized materials was the diary of CFO Howard Schultz, with an entry dated April 1, 2000. Problem with Boston researchers solved. WO received a bonus. Project N continues without obstruction. Using NASA satellite data, investigators analyzed changes in the vegetation patterns of the Javari River region during the 2000th year and discovered an anomalous area 18 kilometers from where the expedition disappeared, where trees had been cut down and then quickly re-established with artificial plantings, a standard practice for camouflaging secret sites in the jungle. On October 13th, federal judge Robert Pearson signed an international arrest warrant for Victor Ortiz on charges of kidnapping and murdering American citizens. Through Interpol, the information was passed to Brazilian authorities, who initiated their own investigation. The operation was conducted under conditions of heightened secrecy, said Brazilian Federal Police Captain Antonio Costa. Preliminary surveillance of Ortiz's home lasted 8 days, using DJI drones and Panasonic hidden cameras mounted in neighboring trees. At 15 hours and 45 minutes on October 14th, Ortiz's Samsung cell phone received a call from an unknown source, after which the suspect began burning documents in a metal trash can in the backyard of his home. This precipitated the decision to conduct a search originally scheduled for the next day. When we entered the house, Ortiz was trying to open the safe, testified FBI agent Ryan Cooper, who was involved in the operation. He had a Glock pistol in his hand, but he offered no resistance when he saw the number of police officers. The contents of the safe confirmed Ortiz's involvement in the disappearance of the American scientists. In addition to personal items, an SD card containing photos of the underground lab and images of bound researchers with visible signs of physical abuse was stored inside. These images, taken with a Nikon D700 camera, were stored in Zero Halliburton's metal container, along with a passport in the name of Juan Ramirez, with Ortiz's photograph, and a one-way LATAM airline ticket to Buenos Aires for October 16th. The dawn of November 3, 2012. 36 agents of the Brazilian Police Special Unit surrounded a country house in a remote area of Amazonas state, where, according to information received, Victor Ortiz was hiding. The operation began at 5 hours and 30 minutes in the morning and ended 22 minutes later with the arrest of the main suspect and his 3 accomplices, Police Chief Ricardo Oliveira told a press conference, showing reporters the strictly confidential Pharmasynth documents seized during the arrest. The trial of Ortiz and 6 other defendants began in Miami Federal Court on March 12, 2013, and lasted 7 months, during which more than 100 witnesses testified about the pharmaceutical giant's criminal activities in the Amazon. My son did not die in vain. His death exposed corporate greed that puts profit above human lives and conservation, said Jason Rodriguez's mother, Helena, speaking to a packed courtroom on July 19th. Despite extensive investigation and confessions from some of the defendants, the bodies of the remaining expedition members, Robert Haley, Michelle Clark, and David Miller, have never been found, leaving their families in agonizing ignorance. Victor Ortiz was sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole, but at his last hearing, he uttered a cryptic phrase, you will never know the whole truth about what happened in the jungle and what they actually found there. Today, years after the tragedy, the section of jungle near the Jawari River where Haley's expedition disappeared remains a no-go zone for explorers, with locals reporting strange sounds and unexplained light phenomena observed there on moonless nights. Science often faces dangers, but the greatest threat to seekers of truth comes not from wildlife, but from those who are willing to kill to keep their secrets. These words from the last book by Carol Haley, the widow of a missing scientist, became the epitaph for the 4 explorers whose thirst for knowledge led them to their tragic deaths in the green hell of the Amazon. As the commander of the operation to capture Ortiz, Captain Luis Mendoza later recalled, "The air was filled with pre-dawn moisture as we took up positions around the house. The jungle foliage muffled the sounds of our movements, creating an illusion of safety for those inside." The operation involved an elite BOPE unit equipped with DuPont body armor and Heckler & Koch assault rifles. According to a tactical plan developed jointly by the FBI and Brazilian police, the home invasion was to occur simultaneously from 3 directions. A local informant, whose name remains classified to this day, told authorities of Ortiz's presence at a remote estate owned by one of Pharmasynth's directors. He arrived 4 days ago in an unmarked Bell helicopter, accompanied by guards with automatic weapons, read the message, transmitted via an encrypted Telegram channel. Footage from a DJI Phantom drone, taken on the eve of the operation, revealed a Bosch surveillance camera system around the perimeter of the property, and 2 armed guards patrolling the area with Doberman service dogs. The subject showed all the signs of a person preparing to flee, explained FBI analyst David Harrison, who reviewed the video footage. Regular movements between the house and the helipad, carrying containers, nocturnal radio conversations. At 5 hours and 29 minutes, a minute before the assault began, the lights in the house suddenly went out. As it later turned out, Ortiz received a signal from his informant in the Manaus police. It could have ended in a firefight, but the coherence of the operatives did not give the criminals a chance. Emphasized in an interview with CBS News, Captain Mendoza later awarded the highest award of the Brazilian police for the operation. Special Sennheiser microphones installed by the listening team recorded Ortiz's last words before his arrest. "Burn all files and activate Protocol 0. That phrase, decoded by technicians, was the key to uncovering a digital vault containing Project Nectar documentation hidden in the basement of the house behind a false wall. When we entered the basement, the smell of burning paper was unbearable, recalled FBI agent Thomas Baker, who participated in the operation. Documents with the Pharmasynth logo were smoldering in a metal container, but some of the materials were salvaged. Among them are photos of the Haley expedition, taken by a hidden camera in the jungle the day before they disappeared. Among the seized materials of particular interest to the investigation was Ortiz's Mont Blanc leather-bound diary. On a page dated March 26, 2,000 years ago, there was an entry: subjects delivered to Pyramid Lab. RH refuses to cooperate. MK and DM show signs of willingness to dialogue. DR is too dangerous, remembers faces. The decision on him has been made. Transportation of the arrested to Manaus was carried out by Sikorsky S-92 helicopter under heavy security. New York Times reporter Sarah Connor, who was at the airport that day, captured the moment Ortiz, wearing Smith & Wesson handcuffs and body armor, was led out of the helicopter. His face expressed no emotion, no fear, no remorse. Only the cold calculation of a man mentally calculating his next moves, she wrote in the report. International law enforcement cooperation enabled a massive worldwide operation against Pharmasynth. Within 48 hours of Ortiz's arrest, the company's offices in 6 countries, including its Boston headquarters, were searched. Chief Financial Officer Howard Schultz was arrested at Frankfurt Airport while trying to fly to the UAE. We are dealing with one of the most sweeping crimes in the history of the pharmaceutical industry, Assistant U.S. Attorney General Michael Taylor told a joint FBI and DEA press conference. The corporation didn't just eliminate competitors, it eliminated people whose sole intention was to create a life-saving drug. The trial of Ortiz and the other defendants drew unprecedented global media attention. The 250-seat Miami federal courtroom was filled to capacity daily. CNN broadcast live coverage of key moments of the trial, and Time magazine devoted the story of Haley's expedition to the cover of the March issue of 2013. Prosecutor James Richardson, delivering his guilty plea, showed the jury enlarged photos of the expedition members. These men went into the jungle with a noble goal: to find a cure for a disease that was destroying millions of lives. Instead, they encountered the worst manifestation of human greed. Testimony from former BioNatura employees created an eerie picture of the expedition's final days. According to the testimony of lab technician Miguel Hernandez, the scientists were kept in different rooms and subjected to grueling interrogations. Ortiz was obsessed with the idea that Haley had passed information about nectar to someone outside the expedition. He personally interrogated the professor using methods I cannot describe without shuddering, testified Hernandez, who was granted immunity from prosecution. The families of all 4 missing researchers were present in the courtroom. Michelle Clark's father, retired Marine Colonel John Clark, could not hold back tears as he described the last known moments of his daughter's life. We lived in the unknown for 12 years. Every phone call could bring news that we both feared and anticipated. A turning point in the trial was the testimony of Dr. Emilio Gutierrez, former scientific director of Project Nectar, who testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. The company discovered that certain alkaloids from Amazon orchids, when properly processed, can stimulate the production of neurotransmitters that not only treat neurodegenerative diseases, but also create powerful psychoactive effects, Gutierrez testified. Developing a legal drug would have taken years of clinical trials with uncertain results. Clandestine production of a psychotropic substance promised billions of dollars in black market profits. The details of Jason Rodriguez's murder, revealed in court, caused many jurors to look away from the evidence presented. He tried to escape after discovering a weakness in the lab's security system, former security guard Diego Sanchez testified. Ortiz personally ordered the "fix the problem" and then documented the execution of the order on a Nikon camera, saying it was an example for the rest of us. On October 17, 2013, after 6 days of deliberations, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges. Judge Robert Kingsley, in announcing the verdict, noted, "In 32 years of judicial practice, I have never encountered a crime that combines such a degree of premeditation, cruelty, and greed."